Most hotel rooms today are built for the booking photo. We build ours for the second stay. Design that ages well isn't an accident. It's a structural choice. Spaces that feel comfortable immediately weren't designed all at once. They evolved. They accumulated. They aged into themselves. And that's exactly the kind of space we're trying to build here. So in this video, I want to show you how we design what we call an elegantly charming space here at Stanton House Inn, and why we design for decades, not for photos. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name is Colin Pearson. I'm a fourth-generation innkeeper at Stanton House Inn in Greenwich, Connecticut. And this house was built in the 1840s and expanded around 1900. So it's older than literally everyone who stays here. And no matter what room you stay in, I want you to be aware of one thing. You are staying in my home. My family home. Pretty much every room in this house includes elements from my own collections. Things I've picked up traveling through this area over the years, and every room has a level of storytelling in it that I take very seriously. For the past several years, I've been slowly reshaping the rooms with one question in mind. What would this house look like if it really had been an inherited estate in the same family for generations? Not a theme, not a museum, an old Greenwich house. Good bones, quiet wealth, a little patina, rooms that feel like they were collected over time, not ordered from a website in one afternoon. We decorate as if the family never left. Instead, they kept right on updating, rearranging, and adding pieces from their travels, all while staying true to the house's roots. In some ways, we're designing a kind of set, but it's a set you can actually live in. The job is making that story feel completely believable when you walk through the door. To do that, we have to make a choice between patina and polish. Polish makes a room look finished. Patina makes a room feel lived in. Polish is what most modern hotels go for. Perfect finishes, bright lighting, everything matching perfectly. It's clean, it's shiny, it photographs beautifully. But it's also a little anonymous. You walk in and you're likely to think, this is nice. But you could be in Dallas or Dubai or Denver. Same rug, same palette, same abstract modern art, just a different zip code. Patina is something else. Patina looks like wood that's been touched for decades, brass that darkens slightly over time, art that doesn't match perfectly because it wasn't all bought on the same Tuesday afternoon. Patina doesn't mean clutter. It doesn't mean chaos. It just means the room feels like it's had a life. And when a room feels like it's had a life, something interesting happens. You relax faster. You stop scanning the space. Your brain understands the room almost immediately, which is exactly what we want. Once you start thinking this way, the choices narrow very quickly. Before I go further, patina does not mean neglect. The line between charming and shabby can get very thin, so we're extremely careful about that. Patina is not an excuse for dust, or stains, or broken hardware. If something looks old here, it should feel clean, intentional, and very well cared for. Behind the scenes, that means deep cleaning cycles, maintenance walks, and constant attention to small details. Good housekeeping is what allows historic spaces to keep their dignity. One of the easiest ways to tell a story in this house is to start with what a room used to be when this was a private home. Room 38 is way up at the top of the house. Back when this was a private residence, those rooms were probably nurseries. We don't have the original plans anymore, but historically that's where children's rooms usually lived. So, when I redesigned room 38, I leaned into that story. The walls are a deep blue-green, very calm, very good for sleep. There are antique pieces mixed in among the furniture, bird prints, maps, small references to travel and exploration. The idea was that the room might have belonged to a curious child in a well-traveled family. Almost like the bedroom I might have designed for myself as a kid if I'd had a much bigger design budget. I'm very proud of that room. And it's been one of our most popular ever since we finished it. The bathroom got a full renovation. Subway tile, porcelain fixtures, brass hardware, nothing flashy, just materials that feel trustworthy and appropriate for the house. After the renovation, something interesting happened. Guests didn't start saying, wow, the design is amazing. Instead, they said things like, this room feels really comfortable. This room just feels right, which is exactly the reaction we're aiming for. Because the goal isn't admiration, it's ease. That's what the rest of this video explains, the thinking behind choices like those. So, how do we decide what belongs in this kind of house? We start with a simple rule. Does this material go with the house? If it couldn't plausibly have existed here before about 1929 or convincingly pretend that it could, it doesn't belong. I avoid plastic in rooms if I can, partly because it gives a motel vibe, partly because it didn't really exist until the 1940s. Same with chrome. It wasn't common until the 1950s. If a material didn't exist when this house was a private home, it has to earn its way in. Take brass. Connecticut used to be the brass capital of the world. Waterbury in particular was famous for it. So when you see brass fixtures here, that's not just a design choice, it's a subtle regional reference. The same thing happens with blue and white porcelain. For generations in New England, imported Chinese porcelain was a symbol of taste and wealth. If you could afford to ship something across the ocean, you displayed it. So when you see blue and white porcelain around the inn, they're not random decorations that I picked up somewhere. They're part of an old New England visual language. Dark woods, linen, wool, stone, these are materials that would have read as good taste in a Greenwich house a century ago. They age well, they're repairable, and they feel like they belong here. Even in the bathrooms, we follow the same logic. Subway tile, porcelain fixtures, brass taps. Subway tile gets a bad reputation now because it's been used in so many modern farmhouse renovations. But historically speaking, it actually fits this house perfectly. Plus, it's durable, it's easy to clean, and it looks like it could have been installed here 100 years ago, even if we installed it last year. Beyond specific materials, we follow a few broader rules. Every room mixes eras. If a room starts to look like a Victorian room or an Art Deco room, we pull back and mix in other periods. At least a quarter of what you see is vintage or antique. Warm metals instead of chrome. Natural metals instead of synthetics. The design cycle for trend-driven spaces is measured in seasons, not decades. Those spaces are designed to be exciting for a moment, not comfortable for a long time. And that's the trap we try very hard to avoid, because this house isn't a photo set. People sleep here, they work here, they read here. They wake up here at 6 in the morning before their coffee has kicked in. So the room has to work for real life, not just for a camera. Elegantly charming spaces are not designed to impress strangers. They're designed to comfort guests. A charming space is one that makes you feel like you can put your guard down. All of that design philosophy ultimately shows up in a very simple way: how the room feels when you walk in. Sterile spaces make you alert. Everything is bright, everything is glossy. You're careful when you put down your bags. You feel like you're visiting someone else's showroom. Layered spaces do the opposite. They help you relax. The materials feel familiar. The lighting is softer. The room has a rhythm your brain recognizes. I think about our guests arriving from New York City. They've had an hour or two on the train or a long day of meetings and 2 to 3 hours of traffic on I-95. They walk in, they put their bags down, and within about 30 seconds, if we've done our job, their shoulders drop a little bit. They instinctively know where to put their suitcase. They can picture themselves reading in the chair. They know where their coffee would go in the morning. They haven't consciously decided to relax, their brain decided that for them. That's the test. Not whether a guest admires the room, whether the room helps them land gently. Now let's talk about the unromantic side of design, regret. Because design isn't just taste, it's capital allocation. Every renovation decision we make is also a financial bet. Every tile, every faucet, every lighting fixture, we're deciding how long that choice will last. If you design for trends, you basically sign up to do everything twice, or a lot more than that. Once when it's fashionable, and again when it isn't. The most expensive renovation is the one you have to redo 5 years later. But if you design for eras instead of trends, you don't rip things out, you refresh. You might swap textiles, change art, upgrade lighting, but the bones stay the same. That's how we think about bathrooms, for example. We choose layouts and materials we'd be comfortable repeating across multiple rooms. Same tile family, same metal family, same basic feeling, because we know those bathrooms will still make sense in the house 15 years from now. Styling is where we allow more flexibility. Lighting, textiles, artwork, those can evolve much faster. But the structural decisions are meant to last. Good design pays for itself through fewer rip-outs and fewer regrets. So let's talk about Instagram hotels for a second. You know the look. High contrast, black and white interiors, chrome and glass everywhere, neon signs on the wall, theme rooms designed around one perfect selfie. Those places can be fun, but they're solving a different problem than we are. Design that's optimized for social media tends to attract attention first and ask questions later. And when you run a 21-room inn, the wrong kind of attention is expensive. Not in dollars, in energy, in mismatched expectations, in guests who arrive looking for something the house was never built to provide. Instagram isn't the enemy. It's just not our design brief. Our goal isn't to win the internet today. It's to have you walk in 10 years from now and think, this still feels right. So that's how we think about designing an elegantly charming space at Stanton House Inn. Not as a style, but as a way of making decisions. We assume the house will outlive us. We assume guests will still walk through these rooms decades from now. So we design for eras instead of trends, for nervous systems instead of cameras. And we let rooms evolve slowly over time. Because spaces that feel comfortable immediately usually weren't designed all at once. They were collected, adjusted, layered, cared for, and allowed to grow older. The most settled rooms aren't the most expensive ones. They're the rooms that were allowed to grow. In this industry, restraint is usually treated as a limitation, something you do when you can't afford to do more. But we found the opposite. Restraint is what lets a room age well. It's what keeps a house from chasing itself and its tail every few years. And it's what guests actually feel when they walk through the door and think, this place knows what it is. That's not caution, that's conviction. And if someone walks into this house 20 years from now and it still feels right, then we did our job.